It scares me, especially if I can't see something that's supposed to be dangerous. And especially it scares me if it's lurking underneath me in dark water, guys. Before we get to the video, I'll say these 3 sentences so that you know what we're talking about. The eruption could happen at any time. It could even erupt tomorrow. The effects would be catastrophic, and there could be no warning time, guys. And what am I talking about? We're talking about Italy again today. I mean, we're talking about Campi Flegrei, a potential supervolcano, its neighboring volcano Vesuvius, about Naples with 3 million people that are at risk if either one of them erupts. We're talking about Stromboli that had explosive, intense eruptions just recently, just a few days ago. Etna just a few days ago. So that's called the Ring of Fire in Italy. But those guys are the ones you see. But there is a monster underneath the sea that you do not see. And that's a dangerous one, guys. And I want to talk about that one today. And I can tell you, you can be glad that you don't see this thing, because it really looks scary. So if you look at the aerial picture of Campi Flegrei, that's a supervolcano that stretches around 100 kilometers, and you see all these extinct craters. They look from the aerial pictures like bombs fell down on that area. They don't look like Vesuvius, like a crater cone volcano, but that's stretching, Campi Flegrei stretching into the sea as well. And these extinct craters, plus the Solfatara crater with the fumaroles, with the hot steam vents that are degassing at the moment, and all the earthquakes, the heavy earthquake swarms that are in the Solfatara as an epicenter. That is only one part of the story, guys, that adds to the risk that this coastline that you see here behind me in Italy is facing. And not only the coastline, also the islands like Sicily and Stromboli, of course, because it's an island. The volcano is an island. So all these islands and the extinct craters plus the active one in Marsili are part of this enormous chain that is also now under sea, and it runs out to the south on the seabed in the direction towards Sicily. And the entire sea between the Bay of Naples and Sicily contains its own ring of fire. They call it ring of fire in analogy to this mammoth ring of fire of active volcanoes that perch on the perimeter of the Great Pacific Tectonic Plate. So imagine if you're looking at Vesuvius. Mount Vesuvius has 4 undersea cousins further south of Vesuvius. They're called Palinuro, Vavilev, Marsili, and Magnagi. So the last 3 were discovered only in the 1950s. They didn't know about them before. So at present, there is some concern about the state of the dormancy of one of them, and that is called Marsili. Marsili is 3,000 meters high. That's almost 10,000 feet. And its cone, it's reaching up very high to like only 500 meters from the surface. So if you're up there in the sea with your boat, it's only 500 meters away from you. It's lurking dangerously underneath you, guys. And that's what I find scary, because most people have no idea how scary this monster looks that's underneath you. And you know, another thing that Marsili takes credit for, it's Europe's largest active volcano. So it is 175 kilometers, that's 109 miles south of Naples, not too far. And while I'm talking, in a few minutes, you'll understand why that is not good, that it's so close to Naples. So Marsili is a submarine volcano. That's how this is called. And it's located in the Tyrrhenian Sea. That's what the sea is called overall. And it's not that far from Stromboli either. I mean, if you're watching my channel on a regular base, I've made quite a few videos about Stromboli recently because its activity right now, what the scientists are saying, is out of the ordinary. So higher, more extreme than normal. They have never seen anything before with Stromboli. So only 80 kilometers northwest of Stromboli. How long is Marsili? I mean, think about almost 3,000 meters, 10,000 feet high. So it has a length of 70 kilometers, guys. That's roughly 43 miles. That is long. And it has a width of 30 kilometers. That's roughly about 19 miles. So if you're in there with your boat, it takes you a while to escape from this thing. And you know, it might look smaller if you see these Google Earth pictures, but you have to put it in perspective if you see these small dots. The other Aeolian islands like Sicily or Stromboli, how tiny they are compared to this monster that is underneath the surface, underneath the water line. If you look at Mount Etna, the volcano Etna, so Marsili has about the same height. It's just underwater. That's why you don't realize it. The volcano Marsili is named after Luigi Fernandino Marsili. He was an Italian geologist who has discovered Marsili, and that's nearly 100 years ago. And what they think about its volcanic activity, they think Marsili started its volcanic activity less than 200,000 years ago, and it is listed as one of the most dangerous submarine volcanoes off the Tyrrhenian Sea, alongside another one that's called Magnahi, Vavilov, and Palinuro. So we're saying that it is as tall as Etna, but it looks completely different. So Marsili does not have the classic cone shape like these other volcanoes because it's composed of a series of cones, multiple cones, and of eruptive vents. Yeah, you hear me right. Eruptive vents that are aligned in a north, northeast, and south, southwest direction. So that's why you see this long thing like the back of a dragon. So the volcanologists are fearful of the relatively fragile walled structure that this whole thing has. So it doesn't look like it's very solid. So why is that a problem? So it's made up of low density and unstable rocks. So and it's fed by the shallow magma chamber that it has right below it. So it does have a magma chamber. Of course, if it can produce eruptions, magma needs to come from somewhere, and it's not that far deep down, right underneath that volcanic monster. And as early as 2010, the Italian experts have announced that it could erupt at any time, guys, at any time, with the potential effects that could be catastrophic. So think about it. This area is not only bothered by Vesuvius or Campi Flegrei that is really showing signs that are very, very concerning. Repeated earthquake swarms, continuous earthquake swarms with higher up earthquakes. The Brady seism, the land is rising, so it shows something's coming up to the surface. Magmatic fluids, gases, magma, because they just this year discovered that it has a very shallow magma chamber at a depth around 4.5 kilometers and not way deeper down than they previously thought. So if Campi Flegrei erupts, this will affect millions of people, and it will be catastrophic for Italy and not only Europe, for the whole world. I made a video about this, guys, if you're interested in that. There's several. Check out my Campi Flegrei playlist, but I made one that says only 74 days left, and that's regarding the world's food supply. That's how scary this is. I mean, most of you know Yellowstone and what could be if Yellowstone erupts. Well, Campi Flegrei is no less dangerous than this. Recent models suggest the eruption and the associated landslide could trigger an enormous tsunami with a 30-meter high wave that could potentially smash into the Calabrian and Sicilian coasts. So the problem is also that to date, we know very little still about this underwater giant. So it was only discovered about 100 years ago, guys, right? So they don't, and how far was the science progressed 100 years ago? Not far. So what recent research suggests is that this underwater stratovolcano is considered active since the last eruptions date back to a period between 7,000 and 3,000 years ago. And according to the most recent volcanological studies that are conducted by the INGV, the Italian Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, and the CNR, they occurred in the central sector of this volcano at a depth of about 850 meters, so close to the surface. And Marsili has been studied only since 2005. They were using a research vessel, and what this vessel detected was considerable instability of Marsili. So Marsili is part of the Aeolian Islands, and of this, it's not an island, but it's part of the Aeolian Island volcanic arc. That's what this is called. That's basically a chain of volcanoes that formed above a subducting plate off the north coast of Sicily and the west coast of southern Italy as a whole. Some of these volcanoes have formed islands, as you can see, but some of them also didn't. There's as many as 10 more volcanoes there around this coast and around these islands that lurk beneath the surface, and I find this super, super scary. So what they're saying is that since Marsili has been formed about 1 million years ago, it is believed that it has probably produced about 80 eruptive cones on its surface, but it also has other openings in this area. I mean, it's huge. We talked about it. That could also spit out lava. So many, many openings, possibilities to do something. So that's why they call it a seamount volcano that is submerged. It is described as a fragile walled structure made of low density and unstable rock, and it's fed by this shallow magma chamber that lies underneath. So what could happen? I just mentioned that the scientists said it could erupt at any time and might experience a catastrophic collapse because it's so unstable. So that would mean that vast amount of magma would be released in an undersea eruption. And you can have a landslide of a volcano, even if it's underwater, and that might trigger destructive tsunamis on the Italian coast. I mean, if you remember, just the recent Stromboli eruption did also create a landslide where debris and a little crater was coming down with the new lava flowing into the sea. This time the tsunami was only 50 centimeters, half a meter high, and was reaching the coast of only Stromboli. It wasn't going further, didn't have any impacts, but it could also produce a larger tsunami if some wall of that crater, of that mountain, would collapse. Because we know these eruptions are happening on the side of the so-called slide of fire. That's this area where we see all these eruptions. And some of these eruptions, they happen half of the height, not on top of Stromboli. So it creates an instability of the wall of this crater. So probably the last eruption occurred a few thousand years ago. And what happens if there's an undersea eruption, so to speak. Of course, it still produces ash and it produces lava that comes out. But what they're saying, any future eruption that Marsili might produce would likely be absorbed by the water. I mean, there's so much water around it. That makes sense, right? And it's unlikely that any of this would reach land or harm the locals. So why are they then saying it could be catastrophic if there was an eruption? Well, here's the warning that the scientists are giving us, and they're saying the danger isn't the eruption, but it is the possible underwater landslides, the collapses. And even worse, there would be hardly any warning of the imminent tsunami. And we'll talk about this in a minute, how long or how little time people would have to get to higher ground on the coasts. So, I have to explain to you like this. If there is an eruption happening, usually we see a seismic swarm before the eruption. Why? Because magma needs to find its way to the surface, needs to grind its way to the surface. So from the magma chamber, it needs to find its way up. So that creates earthquakes, because it's grinding like a miner that is building a tunnel. It's grinding through the rocks and the caprock layer to get to an eruption. So also for Marsili, if there was an eruption, we would see seismic movements beforehand. And that's the problem, guys, because these seismic events, these earthquakes, they could trigger the collapse of this structure, of the weakened rock. And then it could displace an enormous volume of water in the process. If that, what you see here behind me, this Google Earth picture, this dragon-like worm structure, if that did collapse at once, and think about it, it's very, very high, up to 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters. If some of you go skiing, you go up on a mountain, you know how tall that is. Imagine a whole mountain that would collapse and then put that pressure. I mean, I can make a joke, right? If you have a person that has a little bit more body volume and that person jumps into a pool, you know what happens to the pool water on the sides, right? It creates massive waves and the water goes over the edges, right? So that's what you have to think about Marsili. Marsili is a really fat dragon. If that thing collapses, that is the risk. And the scary thing is, the scientists are saying, well, it could happen at any time. It could happen tomorrow without a warning. Whew, that's hard to digest because, if you follow my channel, we've been busy with Campi Flegrei and we've been looking at the warning signs. We've been trying to interpret the warning signs. And also the scientists, they're saying, there's not going to be enough warning time to evacuate millions of people because it's probably going to be very, very fast because they found out that in past eruptions, the magma was already in an explosive state. So all their evacuation plans that they have in place are based on a 72-hour notice, but that's probably not going to happen. Even in Iceland, with these smaller, compared to Campi Flegrei, fissure eruptions that we're observing around the fishing town of Lindavik, they come with little to no warning. Half an hour, 45 minutes, the last time almost nothing, right? So, and imagine you have a catastrophic volcano that doesn't give you any warning time. That is what's so scary, plus the fact that it's underwater and you can't really see it. But there's more. Listen to this. What we know, the research gives us an answer, and it says Marsili is not structurally solid. It could begin erupting at any time with no warning time. And the scientists say, while the indications that they have collected are precise, it is impossible to make predictions. And we know that from all the other volcanoes that we're observing, they can give us their guesses, But who knows whether they're right? They are saying, but they're telling us this. The risk is real. They're very sure of that. So don't believe that this is non-existent. The risk is real, but it's hard to evaluate. That's the problem. And that's why they're saying it could happen tomorrow. It could happen in years. It could happen in 1,000 years. Who knows? So one thing that is interesting, because there are some records that might be dated back to Marsili and that might give us a little bit of an indication what this monster can do. And let's talk about the year 1343. There was a poet, his name is Phlegrei, and he was writing about a devastating a sea storm that killed hundreds of people. So at that time, it wasn't that densely populated. There weren't millions of people, right? So hundreds of people, it's quite a significant number. So a sea storm, where would that be coming from that it kills so many people? So the State University of New York has made a recent study, and they have suggested that the fatalities might have been caused by a tsunami. That's the sea storm. And who could have produced that tsunami? Well, we know that sleeping dragon monster that is only 500 meters underneath the surface, underneath the water surface. And let's talk about Stromboli again. There's archaeological evidence, and that has given the scientists a good insight into an ancient landslip that has reached the Calabrian coast, not only fell back on Stromboli. And just 20 years ago, eruptions at Stromboli have caused 2 tsunamis, but also, again, those guys did not reach the Italian mainland, but the island itself. And just a week ago, I think it was about a week ago, that 50 centimeters, half a meter, like that, not really bad. So one physicist of the University of Bologna has said that it is difficult to predict just how much of a threat Marsili really poses. So his team has published a paper and has basically come up with 5 possible scenarios of what Marsili could do. And the first couple of cases, they only saw a minimal displacement of water with a wave just a few centimeters, so nothing dramatic. So these are those scenarios. We'll talk about this more, but what's interesting is their worst case scenario. And you always have to look at the worst case scenario. You can't just sit there and say, not going to happen. How many times does it happen if you look at what's happening around the world, right? So the worst case scenario involved the southern central summit and the eastern flank of this thing collapsing. So only one flank, not the whole thing. And the calculations that they did was that this would create a 30-meter tsunami wave, as high as 30 meters, 100 feet. So that's massive. That's what they, by the way, have also predicted for Campi Flegrei, should it erupt in the Gulf of Naples, that it would send a 100 feet, 30-meter wave towards Naples, more than 3 million people. So same height. And that wave could reach Sicily and Calabria within 20 minutes. And guys, 20 minutes is not much time, especially when you might not be aware that it even happened, right? So they're saying, when it comes to how many fatalities, the cost of human life that this tsunami could produce, they're saying, well, it depends on the time of the year, of course, because southern Italy is vastly populated in the summer and less in the winter. So summertime would be even more catastrophic. But, this is really bad, because there's also other volcanoes in the area that pose a threat, like Palinuro off the coast of Cilento. But, that's why they In this study, the scientists have called for improved tsunami warning systems. So especially if it could help to save thousands of lives. So they need to really step up their game so that they know what's coming. But as I just said, let's have a little bit of a closer look at these possible eruptive scenarios and the combined tsunami risk, because I find it very, very interesting. And one of the studies on the subject has just been recently published in 2021 in the scientific journal. It's called Bulletin of Volcanology. And they're saying, but remember, the eruption is not the risk that we're looking at, right? So they're saying in the event of a submarine eruption that would happen at depth of like 500 to 1,000 meters on Marsili, the only sign on the surface that you would see would be boiling water linked to the degassing and floating of volcanic material like pumice, these little volcanic rocks that are like fluffy air rocks that they come to the surface and would be visible for a few weeks. So they're thinking, you know, if there was an eruption at depth greater than 500 meters, it would probably only lead to a temporary diversion of shipping routes. So nothing really super critical. But the potentially most dangerous element would not be the eruption itself, as we just found out, but the possible subsequent triggering of this underwater landslide. And that will be linked to a lateral collapse. And they have known about this for quite some time, of this phenomenon, that this can trigger these tsunami waves. So the most dangerous scenario is that a volume of rock that would be set in motion could be 17 cubic kilometers. So 17 cubic kilometers of rock. So you're wondering, well, is that small or is this large? Is this a lot or is it not? Since I love swimming, I always like to use the measures in swimming pools. If you like soccer, you can use soccer fields, but they don't give you a three-dimensional, they don't give you cubic measurements, right? So they only give you square footage. But it corresponds to approximately, listen to this is crazy, 6.8 million Olympic swimming pools. So 6.8 million Olympic swimming pools of rocks that would collapse. So that would definitely be the fat guy jumping into the tiny pool. That would cause a tsunami wave, guys, for sure. I'm laughing, but you know, this is serious. I know sometimes people are saying, how can you laugh when you talk about such a serious topic? But guys, you know, sometimes you have to do a little laughter in life. That doesn't mean that we're not taking this serious and that we're not scared about this, right? So this landslide would set in motion the water that could spread on the surface, generating a train of abnormal waves that would result in a tsunami. So they have done a reference study and they say that train of waves could break on the coast of Campania. We know Campania, Naples, right? That's what I said at the beginning. Basilicata and Calabria within 20 to 30 minutes of the trigger event. So overall could be 30 meters, 100 feet waves. They're saying, well, it depends which area. So they say Campania and Basilicata could be hit by waves of at least 5 meters. So at least 5 meters. That is high enough to catch you if you're not running. And its extreme values could be 20 meters or higher, and 15 meters for southern Campania and part of northern Calabria. And Sicily, the island of Sicily, could be hit by waves of 5 to 10 meters, and the other Aeolian islands maybe could act as a barrier, reducing the force of the tsunami on the Sicilian coasts. But if you look at the settlements on Stromboli, I mean, they're flat, they're almost sea level, right? Then they would have to run up to the Stromboli crater and just hope that Stromboli at that moment won't have one of his pyroclastic events when it's spewing out all the rocks and everything. We know in 2019, a hiker that was on the slope died because he was hit by the rocks. So Sardinia, let's talk about Sardinia. That will be affected as well. Waves could be more contained, and it would only be hit by waves of about 2 to 4 meters high. But these are just predictions. We know that in nature or in reality, it can be way more catastrophic or way less, right? You don't know. What does the INGV say? They have also maybe give a summary of their research, and they tried to do a prognosis, but they also stressed, don't take this serious. We don't know enough about it. So the problem is, they say, one thing that we still don't know is the return times of the Marsili eruptions, because these estimates are based on statistical calculations, normally on large numbers of events. Like, good thing is, in Iceland right now, this volcano in the Sutnuka crater series keeps erupting once a month. So you can collect data and you know exactly what happens before an eruption is triggered. So it's a little bit easier to make a prediction. They're making the prediction that roughly 2.5 to 3 weeks something is going to happen again, because the magma chamber is filling up again. But if you have no records of history, it's difficult, right? So unfortunately for Marsili, there are only 4 dates available. For example, Vesuvius, if they only knew about the Vesuvius eruption in 1631 and in 1944, it would be hard to say what's the number of years in between eruptions, right? So with Vesuvius, they know it's about 400 to 500 years, something like that, right? But if you only have 2 dates, it's a guessing game, right? So they said if they only had the 2 dates of Vesuvius, it would be 400 years. But in reality, the activity of Vesuvius between these 2 dates was almost continuous. It's always been doing something. They're saying, in terms of the hazard that is associated with these submarine eruptions, with the lateral collapses in specific, because they are what causing the monstrous waves, the data that they have at their disposal does not allow them to provide quantitative estimates, right? They say they can do some preliminary considerations, but that's about it. They say that the lateral collapse of submarine volcanoes for them is a phenomenon that they have known for a long time. And if it occurs, they say it does not always necessarily have to produce tsunamis, right? So what they can say is, as a summary, that tsunamis are generally associated with earthquakes and landslides off volcanic islands or sectors of the continental slope. And in order to evaluate the lateral collapses of these submarine volcanoes and the hazard that this might cause, for them it is absolutely essential to estimate the stability of the volcano's slopes. They have done this for Marsili. They say it's very fragile. And they evaluate the volume of rock that is potentially involved. They also have that for Marsili. It's huge, 6.8 million swimming pools, right? And then also they have to know its movement patterns along the slope. And once they know all these parameters, they need to verify whether the volume of rock and the dynamics of this submarine landslide are compatible with the triggering of a tsunami. And that's why they're saying it is a dangerous monster that is lurking under the sea, guys. So if you found that interesting, I mean, one of my viewers, thank you for that, pointed out Marsili to me and said, well, you know, if you're scared about Campi Flegrei, you should be scared of that guy too. And you're right. And that's why I decided to make a video about Marsili. And if you like something like this, guys, please leave this video a like, because only if you watch my videos to the end, leave them a like and show some reaction, only then YouTube pushes this video out to reach more viewers to help me grow my channel. So it's your decision whether you want that or not, and I hope you do want that. So please leave this video a like. I'd be very grateful for that. And of course, thanks guys for all the coffees you keep buying me. It keeps me running and going. And thanks for the supers. You guys are just amazing. And I just recently got notified by YouTube. You saw it probably in my community post. 10 million views, guys. That's exciting, right? When you start a YouTube channel, you're like happy when you have your first 10 views, and you'd never imagine like over 40,000 subscribers in just a few months. So you guys are absolutely awesome. I adore you for that. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. So if you want to watch more, check out the videos in the end screen, and there's playlists about what's going on in Iceland and what's going on in Italy and other stuff as well. So stay tuned, guys. Stay safe. See you soon. Bye-bye.